Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'll be discussing the latest concession from Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss as they attempt to realign themselves with political reality and win back the approval of their MPs. But there are more battles for them still because Kwarteng announced more moves. So he announced a move that his backbenchers will approve of, but then two others that'll have them calling for more U-turns yet. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it's all going wrong for Putin right now, isn't it? Ukrainian forces have been making more breakthroughs and there's more to come, making a mockery of his recent annexations, and his London branch, the Tory party leadership, is facing incursions from the more sane MPs within their party as well. Kwarteng has now been forced into effectively another U-turn. So he wouldn't release the OBR forecast alongside his mini budget. He said, you'll have one when we do the proper one on November the 23rd. He's now said that he will bring that forward. So there's now going to be the next budget announcement this month. So a few weeks away, potentially. But there's still plenty that MPs have got a problem with. You know, Truss and Kwarteng have already been forced into a U-turn on the issue of the top rate of tax. They've now been forced into it's not really a U-turn, but it is a major concession in bringing forward the next budget statement, along with that forecast. Truss and Kwarteng are in very dangerous territory here. In politics, a U-turn is a U-turn. It's considered very bad. In many ways, it shouldn't be, because at the end of the day, it's you changing your mind on something. And if you change your mind on a bad policy, that should be a good thing. But I think the damage of the U-turn is it's assumed that you're not supposed to keep making mistakes at the very top of government. I mean, there are certain jobs where mistakes are very, very costly. Everyone makes mistakes, but there's some jobs where mistakes are incredibly costly. You wouldn't like your idea of a surgeon making serious mistakes, or a general. So we certainly don't expect it at head of government. And in politics, a U-turn is a U-turn as well. They happen, but if they'd reversed every policy that cannot win the support of their backbenchers, it would still have been one U-turn. It would have been a U-turn. Damaging, certainly, especially as they dug in for 10 days before shifting from their unsustainable position. But there are other bones of contention as well. There are 4 further fiscal policies that Kwarteng and Truss are still forging ahead with that nobody really asked for, and that are unpopular with the public at a time of severe pay restraints, rising inflation and rising interest rates. First, removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. That's just stupid. Serves no good purpose. Serves no purpose economically. If they're arguing that they need to attract the top talent and pay is the way to do that, encourage banks to pay higher salaries. It's the bonuses which are capped, not the salaries. Higher bonuses only encourage riskier gambles with other people's money, and they know it. Higher salaries don't. But it's also a politically stupid move. It doesn't gain electoral support, but it can lose it. Most voters still remember the global crash and they don't want to reward those responsible for it, nor do they want to invite another. Especially not now. Do you know, we've got enough to be dealing with. Thank you very much. The second is the cancellation of the corporation tax rise. The government argue that lower corporation tax means being more competitive when it comes to attracting investment. Okay, so how come France attracts the most foreign inward investment in Europe then, and its minimum corporation tax rate is 26.5% to our 19% then? It's nonsense. What makes you attractive to investment? Yeah, of course, businesses would love to pay lower corporation tax, but ultimately what makes them attractive is making lots of profit. And that means access to lots of highly skilled, fit and healthy workers, for which you need a well-funded education system, well-funded healthcare system. Good transport links, for which you need a modern road and rail network. Easy access to customers, for which you need a large single market. It's obvious why the UK used to be the #1 destination in Europe for foreign inward investment before 2016 and has since been overtaken by France. So another policy that you can't make the economic argument for. It doesn't make political sense either. The amount that's going to be cut from tax revenues, because they were planning on putting corporation tax up, now they've stopped that, that is going to come to an amount that's just above the amount that they're now cutting from public services. Which brings me on to the third. At a time when even senior Tories are openly saying that our public services are knackered, even Liz Truss is saying, oh yeah, they're in a terrible state, because it's impossible to deny. Kwarteng has just announced £18 billion worth of cuts to them. And this is just the start, by the way. This is just the start. And that is a little less than the amount that would be raised if he went ahead with the planned corporation tax increases. Neither the public nor businesses will be impressed with that. And fourth, the real terms cut to benefits. The government says there won't be well, they're hedging at the moment, but they're pretty much saying there won't be an inflationary increase in benefits, even though this was promised previously. Now, it's not been formally announced yet, as far as I can tell, but that's the impression we're getting. So Truss is saying that, oh, you will absolutely protect the most vulnerable. But all of those on benefits are the most vulnerable, all of them. If working people need universal credit to live, it's because the rate of pay does not match the basic cost of living. You cannot get more targeted support for the vulnerable than an uplift in benefits. Then ask yourself why the Tories increased universal credit during the period of intermittent COVID lockdowns, 2020 and a bit into 2021. Why did they increase benefits then, but then remove that increase, that what was called the uplift? They got rid of it. It wasn't economic. It was political. The Tories get away with shafting the most vulnerable. Why? Because most don't vote in large enough numbers to hurt their election chances. But with the lockdowns, all of a sudden, more middle-class voters were going to face the full cruelty of the benefit system in the UK. Because people who were used to having a nice, comfortable, safe job, all of a sudden weren't. So they were introduced to the benefit system. The benefit system, just to point out, which is that the least generous, despite what Brexiteers say, the least generous in the OECD. The last thing the Tories needed was active swing voters seeing it for themselves firsthand and suffering. So they increased the benefits. Then, when they judged enough of those active voters had left the system, they dropped it back down. Well, the same thing's happening here. The squeeze on incomes and the increase in the cost of living, not helped with the sudden increase in mortgage payments, thanks to Truss and Kwarteng's clumsiness, means that those active swing voters are struggling. Ordinarily, Tory MPs would not make a fuss about squeezing those on benefits. They didn't for the last 12 years. The reason they are now is down to three major factors. First, this is hitting a lot of their constituents. Second, we're more than halfway through the Parliament, so we're at the time now where MPs are starting to put thought into the next election, because you're over the hill now. You're looking at it. Third, for the first time since they came to power, Labour are polling ahead in all areas against the Conservatives. It's not just a general lead. They've had a general lead before. This is a lead in all the important areas, including leadership and economic competence. This is the first time in over a decade that they're having to take the challenge from Labour seriously. This means that all of a sudden, quite out of the blue, for reasons unknown, Tory MPs are developing a social conscience. The position that Truss and Kwarteng are adopting would work in the Tory party, but only in better times. Granted, it would soon bring crap times, but they'd get away with it until then. But right now, you've got Truss and Kwarteng who've been wanting to unleash this economic madness for years. They've been thinking, oh, this is the thing to do. This is the thing to do. They've finally got their chance, but they've paid no attention to the economic conditions. None at all. It's economically and politically unsustainable, but they're going ahead with it anyway because this is their chance. And so we come back to those U-turns. Truss claims she's listening, but the polls say otherwise. Any U-turn runs the risk of weakening her authority. You get away with it if you, like what you're supposed to do in politics is if you've got a controversial idea, you float the idea first. You don't make a formula policy, you just say, we're considering this. If it meets resistance, you drop it like a hot potato before it becomes formal policy. If you adopt it as formal policy, then abandon it quickly, as Boris Johnson often used to, you look silly. But you still limit the damage. Like people used to criticise Johnson for his swift U-turns. I used to make fun of it. But they are less damaging than digging your heels in. The reason I mostly criticise Johnson is because these policies were obviously the sort of thing he should never have formally backed in the first place. But if you find major resistance to it, abandon it quickly. You don't dig your heels in for 2 weeks before being forced into a climb down. That makes you look not just silly, but weak. In politics, you have to be sure of your support before you commit to anything. You know, people have sometimes criticised Starmer being too cautious, and I think he probably is. But you contrast that with going full steam ahead with something just because you think it's a good idea, but without checking that any bugger else does. But what if Tory MPs are still prepared to vote against the budget? Then there'll have to be another concession later. That's another U-turn. What if that's not enough and Tory MPs demand more? Another U-turn. So instead of just reversing all of the deeply unpopular policies, getting it all out of the way in one U-turn, one headline that goes, oh, the ladies for turning after all, Truss and Kwarteng risk having to make a series of concessions. And each one weakens their authority. It's over a long period of time. It keeps her inability to lead a major news story for a long period of time. And Truss has been in politics for years. How can she be this lacking in the basics of political operations? Even if they did reverse all these policies, damage is still done. Anyone with a mortgage that's not fixed right now, they're seeing their monthly payments go up. Anyone who was just about to buy their first home, they've got the money, they're just about to get the mortgage, all of a sudden they've been told, no, sorry mate. Or it's more expensive if they are able to do it. Anyone paying into a private or works pension has found that the value of their pot has just shrunk. Or if they haven't found that, it's because they've not been checking. All of that damage remains. Even if the government actually did start to listen and did everything right from now on, that is damage that's done. It's not getting repaired. But by failing to engage with backbenchers about what they'll ultimately accept, the government are increasing and prolonging the damage. The only people enjoying this are Labour staffers. Most of them have never been to a celebration the day after a general election. They're within a couple of years of finding out what that feels like. And there's a core of relatively sane Tory MPs that know that. Next Wednesday, Liz is going to be facing PMQs. It's only going to be her second as Prime Minister, thanks to all the hoo-ha. It'll be her second PMQs as Prime Minister. It should be a beauty. But sod the questions from Starmer and Blackford, they may be interesting, but what I'm going to be waiting for is the questions from her own MPs. Will she have worked with them to come to an accord by then? If not, how challenging will those questions be? Should be interesting. In the meantime, every U-turn that Truss is forced to make now is going to be deeply embarrassing and give more people the impression that she doesn't know what she's doing. Some right-wing commentators are blaming the Tory rebels. And yeah, sure, rebelling does make your party look bad. It's not a good thing. But the fact of the matter is the public don't like these policies. If all Tory MPs continue to back them, as they did loudly and happily when Kwarteng read them out in Parliament before they realised how unpopular they were going to be, they'd still continue to be unpopular with voters. The reason why these Tory MPs are rebelling is because they've realised they're unpopular. So maybe the fault is with the MPs at odds with the voters, not those trying to align with them. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.